I thought it's just worth us doing a quick refresh of what we're doing here. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but I thought it's just worth us talking again about, the reason we're doing this is we want to be able to, so I just want us to kind of focus back down on the ability for you to deliver some benefits within the time period of doing this, to also give you some theory and some practical things to do. And also the big thing for us is to give you some confidence that once we've finished this course, you can go away and do it again. There are kind of key things for us is that, we give you some practical things to do. Hopefully you can deliver some benefits, and actually it gets a mix of that theory and practical, and that actually you can do this once we've finished the course as well. So we're doing short bite-sized chunks, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through all of that because we're doing it every week. And we're down here in this number 3 now. So we've done the lean principles, we've done how you look for improvements. We're now looking at how we improve productivity in our different operations. So we're more than halfway through, I would say, and we're about to talk about short interval controls. And last time we did practical problem solving. So for today, we're talking about short interval control. It's not a huge topic. It's all fairly simple. Might be stuff you're already doing, but we'll go through the theory of it. First of all, we'll just do a quick review of how things have gone since the last session, and talk about the sort of call to action from that. I'll do a quick introduction to what short-term interval control means, why it's important to do. We'll do developing a short-term interval control system. We'll talk about using the data created by that system to improve performance. We'll do a short exercise at the end if we have some time, and then we'll do the summary and a call to action and the introduction to the next session. So fairly sort of standard sort of stuff in terms of we'll do some introduction, why it's important, how you do it, and then we'll do an exercise, and then we'll do a quick summary. So what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this problem solving method, talked about defining the problem. So this is about saying, are we absolutely clear about what the problem is, measuring the extent to which the problem is occurring. So understanding, if we understand the problem, can we actually measure the extent of it? We'd also want to think about, well, what does good look like? We talked a lot about analysis. So you had a go at doing 5 whys, I think, during the session. You also had a quick go at going through one of these exercises. We then talked about, well, once you've got to the root cause and you're thinking about solutions, how do you select the most appropriate solution? And then finally, how do you ensure that this improvement is realized and sustained? So that's making sure you're putting the things back into the organization. So if there is one best way of doing things, that everyone's doing that one best way. So hopefully that makes sense and we can remember some of that. And I think, as I said, we did a sort of quick 15-minute fly through a problem solving, and you had to go at doing some 5 whys as well. I'll talk to you a bit about short-term interval control. So look, this as a topic is really simple. It's nothing, I know none of this is particular rocket science, but this one particularly is a fairly simple technique to think about. So it's a structure for identifying, acting upon opportunities to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of production. Crikey, I wrote that with some big words in it, didn't I? So I'll show you what it is. It is thinking about, if you have a shift, a day, an order that's got a total of, we're going to get 500 strawberry punnets done in this example. It's thinking about how can you ensure that as you progress along towards that output, that you are really checking to see if you're progressing towards it. This is the simplicity of it. It's about saying, have we, if this was a day and we had 500 of these to get done by the end of the day, and we assumed that everyone was working on the same pace, we had the same team throughout the day, can I check in to ensure that for the first quarter of the day, I've roughly done 125. By lunchtime, I've roughly done 250. By the afternoon break, I've roughly done 375 to get me to my 500. Does that make sense? Yeah. So rather than saying at the end of the day, let's have a chat about how we've done, it's about saying, can we split that down into smaller chunks to enable us to see how things are going? And what we suggest is plan, do, check. Can't believe I can't say that. I must have said plan, do, check, act a million times in my life. So plan, do, check, act at each of those stages. So when we get to the first sort of break in the morning, let's just assume this is a day, first sort of break in the morning, are we going to review how we're getting on? Can we see how things have progressed against our plan? And are we able to take some action to ensure that we hit our end day? The whole principle of this being that once you get to the end of the day and you've said you were going to do 500 and you say you've done 400, there's nothing you can do about it then. That's kind of the day's gone. That's the end of it. Whereas if you start to see a pattern during the day that means you're not going to deliver your aspiration, you have a chance to do something about it. I say a chance, so it might not mean you can do anything about it, but at least you have an opportunity to do something about it. So we always encourage businesses to try and use short interval control, to try and break down these big numbers for days, for weeks, etc. So I've been to businesses where they just measure the week, where they go, production has to finish at this point at the end of the week. And the more you break it down into smaller chunks, the more you're able to predict how things are going and the more able you are to take some action. So that is the principle of short-term interval control. So as I said, it gives you an opportunity to do something about exceptional performance. So exceptional in my eyes is either exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. So are things going better than expected or are things going worse than expected? So for example, we looked at this point and we were meant to get 125 done, we've done 230. Where, the sorts of decisions you might make at that point are we going to continue at that pace to ensure that by the end of the day we've outstripped our target for the day? But by looking at that, you'd probably do more than you require. So would you look at the resource that's on that and think about whether you would put them somewhere else? Think about how you'd split that resource. So exactly what Laszlo was describing in terms of that splitting of resource across different teams. Do we move some people who are on this process to another process that might be struggling? So yes, at this point in the day, if you're over, you might take a decision to say, well, we've got, clearly we're going to hit the target. Maybe we should move some resource off here. The other thing to check, obviously, with some of these things is that, are we maintaining the right quality as well? So it's not just about output, is it? It's about output at the right quality. So conversely, you might get to this point and say, we're actually under our target for today. So you'd want to understand, well, what are the reasons for that? Is it that actually the expectation for the day was unreasonable and therefore we're never going to achieve it with the amount of resource we've got? Is it that there's been issues? All things that you could potentially solve, all things that you might say, well, there might be another team who's doing better and you might want to move people about. So one of the big advantages of this is actually about moving resource around. So if you've got lots of resource across lots of teams, if you can see some teams outperforming and some's underperforming, you might think about, well, is there some underlying issues of why teams are underperforming we need to resolve? Or is it just a case that we need to move resource around for whatever reason as well? So that's what it really helps you to do, to look for when the performance is not as good as you'd like, or it's actually better than you'd like, and thinking about, well, do you want that continued improved performance to carry on throughout the day? I think I've said this. The other thing that's useful, if you start to do these things and actually start to talk to the people and check in with teams and supervisors, it actually is a very good thing in improving employee engagement as well, because actually you're more present and understanding what's happening as managers. It drives you to go and find out. It drives you to go onto the the picking, the packing area and find this information out. It encourages team leaders to just engage with their teams to try and understand a bit more regularly. And it's also great that for this fast-paced continuous improvements, we're a massive fan of trying to make small improvements quickly. So not wait till the end of the day and say, well, it was this huge problem we had with a lack of a particular thing, or a machine went down, or someone didn't turn up. It's about how we can make improvements as we go through the day. As I say, it's not hugely complicated, but it's one of those things that we don't see as often as we'd like. So it's great to hear that you guys are doing it in reality now anyway. So first of all, develop the mechanisms to capture the data. So being sure that you can capture the information quick enough to be able to go and check in a quick enough way. So, so there's no point in saying, we'll go and check how everyone's doing, as if we don't do any means of capturing how productive people have been until the end of the day. So you need to have those mechanisms that mean as you go through the day, you can see at the points you choose to do what the actual how much work has actually been done. Also, be cautious of not balancing this with quality, because the danger is obviously if if you're focusing on volume and constantly focusing on volume, the danger could be that quality goes down. So just be cautious of not allowing quality. So just have a think about what are the measures of quality as well. I think we're going to discuss more about quality in the next session. So simplest and most efficient way to capture data. I think we talked about some of these yesterday, but I presume some of your businesses will have some electronic systems where we capture weights and all of those other things, and others will probably have manual scales where we capture them manually, or so that they'll go from different ranges. And I'd encourage you just to think about what's the simplest way of capturing the data if you don't have those electronic methods. I think I showed you things like tally sheets and stuff last time, about some very simple thing where you just get people to tick off how they're getting on, and just to do simple counts. Look at how you can have things visually where you can just see how things are progressing. All of those types of things is just trying to keep it simple. Don't have a massive report that someone has to fill in all the time, because the reality is it takes away from production, and secondly they probably won't do it accurately. So simple, easy mechanisms to capture the data. Think about what your interval could be. So I've already said this, the shorter the better. So I presume in some pack houses you might even have real-time data that's showing you how much is coming off the line every second minute of the day. Things like call centers have that real-time data of how many calls they've done, etc. I don't think you need that amount of accuracy. You just need to think about what's the right intervals and balance the effort to capture with the benefits of doing a review. So those intervals, just think about how much effort it is to do the review compared to the benefit you're likely to get from it. The way I've always done this is just to do it is kind of half it, and you'll find the natural place for it to be. So if you're only reviewing, so let's take Boyko's example, if you're in the first instance, you're doing your 3 days production, and actually, you maybe started with just 3 days, breaking it down into a day is a good next step. You might then think about, to give us even more opportunity to see how things going, but we might break those down into half days as well, and just to see if you can bring the time window down a review to something that feels sensible, that feels useful, and gives you the opportunity to improve. I think that I'm sure there's some mathematical way of doing it, but you just need to think about what's the benefit compared to the effort to do it, because it does take some effort to do it. So just think about, if I've got this window of time, my first job will be, well, how can I split that into 2 or 3 in your case, Boyko, because it makes sense. Then how can I split that even a bit further to a point where I can see that I can get some benefit from it. The other really useful thing is if you can make this data visible. So rather than it being lots of questions, whether you can make these things highly visible. So actually you can see how things are progressing. So you don't have to ask lots of questions. You can see what's the volume of work. Things like whiteboards are great for this, but also, if you're producing something and you can have things stored in a way that you can see how far you've got in production just by the nature of how many trays, etc., that's a really useful thing as well. So all this stuff, keep it simple, keep it visible, try and work back from the overall and just break it down to as many chunks as you can. So we're going to go a bit into how you would then do this to get, so some of these bits you will be doing. So this is all round plan, do, check, act. So it's a familiar routine that we always do it round plan, do, check, act. So what is the work I have? What resources do I have available to do it? So based on the work I have and the resources available to do it, I should be able to set an expectation of what I'm likely to get done in the day. Is that fair enough? If we understand work rates and all of those things, we should be able to say, I forgot what you said, but was it 3 tons or something? I can't remember now in terms of whether it was over the 3 days. You've got an expectation, you've got an order, you've got the right amount of people to pick that target. But that's key to think about in the first instance. What work do I have and what resource do I have available to do it, to be able to decide what's my expectations or targets for the day, the shift, the number of days, and at what quality. So then obviously break those into intervals, at each interval how many, at what quality, and then communicate the expectations for the day. So this is a key one and not always done, but if you're not very clear about what you're expecting for the day, then sometimes it could be really hard. We worked in a farm where I spent a lot of time talking to their farm owner for picking, where he'd speak to people on the field and say, well, you're going to pick that field today. If you can just go as fast as you can, best efforts. And at the end of the day, based on how he'd done, he'd then normalize the numbers and work out the bonuses. And I said to them, for people's motivation and understanding how to work, that's a really difficult way of seeing how you're progressing. Just going to get saying do as best you can, because my best you can compared to someone else's best you can is very different. So I think it then caused lots of backwards and forwards in terms of, you know, pay and what the normalized rates were, what people's expect, you know, it doesn't cause the right environment. So yeah, being really clear about what expectations are and being clear what the intervals are for the day. And the important thing is you're doing this routine of plan, do, check, act. You know, sometimes you'll get the target wrong. Sometimes the target will be wrong. The expectation will be wrong. But if you keep going around this cycle of saying, have we checked how we've done against our target? Sometimes we'll say we completely got that wrong, and there'll be a reason. So we'll still learn from that anyway. So this could be, as I said, these could be your targets for the day. Whoops. So 125, 5%. As I say, I've straight lined this. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to straight line it from 0 to 500. You can be more complex than that, and you'll learn that. Again, if you're doing the reviews, you'll learn that. So I think I've only got a couple of slides left, and then I think we'll take a break, and then we'll do a quick exercise around it. So I think I've said this, but just to be clear, you know, at these intervals, this is what you should be doing. If this is formally where you talk to the people, talk to the supervisors, or just review it. So the check is checking how you performed at that interval against the plan for that interval. So against my plan of 125 punnets, 5% waste, my first step is to check how I've done. So we're kind of starting over in this check bout. We're then talking about, are there actions that need to take to address the exceptions? So if I'm overachieving, are there things that can be done to maybe say, are we happy to overachieve for the day? Is it a blip? Should we be sharing the resource? If we're underachieving, are there things that have meant people haven't been able to do the work as we predicted? Was that prediction unrealistic? All of those types of things we should then be able to address and act upon. And therefore, once we've acted upon them, we should be able to adjust the plan for the next interval. So you might say that actually we're not going to achieve it. We need to adjust our expectations for today. Or you might think, let's get some more resource to do it. So adjust the plan for the next interval, and then implement the end, do the actions, and undertake the next interval. So the actions happen, and then you go back and check performance again. So it's this constant review of check how things are going. If there's exceptions, take some actions, adjust your plan, implement the actions, go to the next interval. So the things that we'll quickly do this one, the things that are important with this is that you allow the team leader and the team and the autonomy and skill to use the system, make improvements. That's a long-winded way of saying enable the people who are closest to the work to make suggestions and make improvements as a first stop. Don't make it an autocratic process where you know, a high-level manager turns up and just shouts at everyone, walks off again. It's about enabling the team to see these things and make improvements. So I think it's great when you've spoke about how you're doing some of these improvements, that you're involved in the people who do the work, involve them in these improvements. And if you have this system and you have team leaders in the field, empower them to do these types of things. The other thing is realistic performance targets. One mistake is just constantly pushing people with no improvements just to do more and more and more with no method of getting any better. Changing a target doesn't necessarily change people's performance. It will for a bit, but you need to have something that's helping them improve. So setting targets that are just unrealistic is not helpful. It's not a sustainable way of doing it. People just get more and more frustrated. So just have some realistic expectations and targets. Make sure you have some well-managed and engaging short discussions at the intervals. So try and keep them, some short discussions. As I said, a visual way of capturing and discussing the plan is very important. So I'm a massive fan of whiteboards and things that are really simple, just to say our target is today and having a run rate and putting that against it. Make sure the data is accurate. So make sure what you're spending time discussing is accurate and you don't spend your time discussing the data, or even worse, making actions that aren't appropriate. And finally, make sure leadership supports and drives the system of short-term interval control. So it's good to get people engaged in being able to see this stuff, engaged in being able to help out with it. So that's what I've got in terms of content, in terms of method. I've got a short exercise here for today. This will be well within your breadth. I just thought it was worth us trying to do something to think about how we might use this short-term interval control. So I've made up a scenario where we've got a picking team of 5 and a team leader pick into punnets and take to a weigh station where they're weighed and quality checked. They work at 10-hour shifts, 1 hour of breaks, an average work rate of 50 punnets per hour. I have no idea whether that's reasonable, unreasonable or not. I'm just making these numbers up. So 50 punnets per hour per person. So my questions on the right hand side is, what's the plan expectations for the day? So that's just a bit of maths. How many intervals might you do? And the expectation for the intervals. How would you capture and display the data? What would your standard agenda be for the interval review? I'm saying agenda. What sort of questions and what sort of things would you do at those standard intervals? And what would you do if you were below expectation at the first interval of the day? So it's 5 questions. So it's a bit of maths. So it's a fairly simple exercise to get to what your average rate will be for a day, then work out how would you split that day into intervals and the expectation for each. And after that, how would you capture and display the data? What could your standard agenda be? And what would you do if they were below expectations? So this is so you can use your imagination. This doesn't have to be your own real examples. Just think about what you could do. Short interval control. It's a structured way for identifying opportunities early. So we're identifying those opportunities early so we can do something about them. So before it's too late. So at the end of the day, we can't recover what's happened at the end of the day. We can only try better tomorrow. Whereas if we see performance as we're going through the day, we can make some changes if we're able to make changes. Firstly, think about the data. Always think about quality as well as just volumes. Then how to capture it and make the data visible, and think about how frequent your intervals should be. So the process for each day: create your expectations for the day on the required work based on the work and resource, and at the intervals, check how things are going, create actions based on the exception, and review the plan for the next intervals. So constantly go around this plan, do check out this cycle of, I've created a plan, we do the work, I check how it's going. If it's not going to how I expect it to go, do I need to act? Do I need to revise my plan for the next interval for us to do the work? So it's an active thing. It's actively working with the people who are doing the work to understand if there's issues, what are those issues? What can I do about it? So we are going to look at next time about productivity metrics and productivity rates, distribution curves, and all sorts of things about this. So we're going to talk a bit more about looking at the different measures of productivity and the measures that we should be using with teams. So we've got some models around that, and also thinking about distribution curves of people's performance. I'll talk more about it, so I was about to run on into it. We'll talk about it next time. It's probably enough to take in for today.